show about sports by people who love sports. Welcome to Sports Isolated. Here's your host, Callum. Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Sports Isolated. Today on the show, we've got assistant midfield coach for the Gold Coast Suns, Tate Kaesler. Tate, how are you, mate? Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Pleasure, Callum. Not a problem, mate. How are you today?
I'm very well, thank you. I really appreciate your time, and it's going to be really interesting for myself and hopefully the viewers at home to hear about what football's like on the Gold Coast. And obviously, it's been the Gold Coast is one of the newer teams in the AFL, and it'll be interesting to obviously hear about what's going on up there for sure.
Yeah, mate. Look forward to the chat, and obviously she's a little bit quiet up here at the moment, as it is around Australia. But we're trying to do as much as we can to obviously help support players and support our families. I've got 3 young kids that are homeschooling at the moment as well, so it's that's a lot of fun, and you get to spend a little bit more time with them. But obviously, being a football head, mate, the quicker and we can get back into footy, the better. But obviously, the main thing is making sure that the health and welfare of everyone all around the world is top of our agenda.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree with that anymore. Tate, can you give us a background into your career in AFL football?
Yeah, I suppose just quickly from a playing perspective, I obviously played SANFL at Sturton, North Adelaide. But before that, I was a young junior up at the Harndorf Football Club, which is, somewhere where I always wanted to go back and play at the end of my career, and I managed to do that. So, that was something that was really special to me. But yeah, played a lot of footy at SANFL level. Unfortunately, probably due to my height, I didn't quite make it to the AFL level. But, it's something that I always thought, well, how could I, get myself to be the best coach I could be? And, during my junior days, I had some of my coaches tell me that one day they thought I'd, be able to turn into a reasonable coach. So I sort of followed that dream, and it sees me today up here on the Gold Coast, in charge of the AFL midfield group.
Yeah, obviously before you went to the Gold Coast, you're a South Australian boy, and as you said, you played SANFL. You worked at the Crows for nearly 12 years, and you had a number of different roles at the Crows. So can you tell us a little bit about the different roles that you had while you were at Adelaide?
Yeah, sure, mate. I probably took a little bit different path than probably a lot of the current coaches in terms of, obviously playing at the AFL level gives you a bit more of a profile than what I've had, which helps with obviously getting a job when you come out of footy. So my sort of route was a little bit different. I was actually the merchandise manager at Adelaide for sort of just over a year. And obviously that was selling badges and jumpers and all that to the passionate supporters out there at the Adelaide Football Club. And I really value those days from where I am now. It was, really good to understand the commercial side of footy and what actually goes in to, obviously putting a team out on the park every week. It's not just, the football department and the players. It's the whole lot of commercial team, membership, community service, finance, all these guys that put in hours and hours of work to make a club, be successful. So that was where I started. I was then lucky enough to win a job internally, which involved some recruiting for a couple of years, which I did under the Matt Rendell, who was the national recruiter back in then. And, I was lucky enough to obviously come across some great players when, we were recruiting back then. And it then led on to a bit more of an expanding role where I was, a couple of days a week, I was out on the track with the AFL team, with the likes of, it was really eye-opening, Andrew McLeod, Mark Rasciuto, Ben Hart, Simon Goodwin, these guys, that obviously superstars from the Adelaide Football Club. So it was a little bit daunting and, challenging at that time. But I think the most important thing I learned over that sort of period when I sort of moved into the development role, which I did for 6 years, was about building relationships. And that's been something that I've held with me, to this day. And I think it's the most valuable thing about building relationships with players, not just on the field, but, what they like to do off the field and what values they have, so that you can help dig into that for them. From there, during that time, I also was a development coach for the forwards, which we then were lucky enough at that point in time to open up our own SANFL team with the Adelaide Crows, obviously playing in the SANFL competition. I looked after the forwards there under David Teague, who was the AFL line coach for the forwards then, and he was instrumental in me developing as a coach, just his ability to allow me to be who I am and try my different ways. And he gave me the confidence to continue to build my profile, which was really good. And, able to work with some of the greats in the forwards like, Eddie Betts, Taylor Walker, Tom Lynch, Josh Jenkins, Charlie Cameron, these guys that I was, lucky enough to work with and build those relationships has been something that's obviously stayed with me, from where I am now. And during Don Pike's times, I was the team defence coach. So that was in 17 and 18, which were obviously 17. We were quite a successful year where we were lucky enough to play in the grand final. So that was a really excellent year for us. And so they've been sort of the multiple of jobs that I've done over my 12 years at the Adelaide Football Club.
Yeah, I suppose as we were just chatting off camera before, it's great to hear people are obviously getting rewarded for their loyalty to the club. I know people who have worked in the bar and then moved into membership and then moved into community. So, football's a really close industry, and obviously, as you said, maintaining those connections and relationships is extremely important. So, Tate, at the end of 2018, you decided to move up to the Gold Coast Suns to pursue, obviously, some more opportunities. Can you tell us a little bit about that move and sort of how it came about?
Yeah, sure. I think the big thing with our industry is at times, it's one of those industries where you've got to be prepared to move occasionally because, coaches chop and change. The senior coach chops and changes. Head of football changes, so everyone comes in with different views. So I think first thing, part of this role is, that, it could be a 2-year deal. It could be a 3-year deal. You could be lucky like me and allow, when I was in coaching, I think it was like 9 years. So, you can be lucky at times if you do a really good job that you can, do that. But I think the thing for me was it was time for me to sort of challenge myself. Obviously, I'd been in the Adelaide environment for, 12 years at the Adelaide Football Club and, experienced some really good roles and met some great people and developed my coaching and learnt from a lot of people, that I think it was time for me to challenge myself and sort of become uncomfortable and, move away and see what one I could take and bring to another club, and also learn what other clubs are doing that may help me keep developing in the future. So, I was obviously in discussions with Adelaide as I was coming to the end of my contract, and there was opportunities there for me to continue on and in the role that I was doing, if that's something I wanted to do. But the other thing was, having a chat with Stuart Dew and John Haynes, who's the head of footy up here, and they sort of put it to me about, if I wanted to challenge myself, there was a couple opportunities up here that may, be something that I'm looking for. And I suppose doing development over time, you learn to, how with young players, their careers could be 2 years. Again, like coaching, it could be 12 if you're really lucky. So coming up here to start with last year as a development coach with the midfield was something that was really exciting for me. Obviously, it was a young club. They'd gone through some really hard times. They were looking at doing a little bit of a revamp. Obviously, they moved on. I think in that time it was like 15 players and there was like 11 staff. So it was a real shake-up in the footy department. And I was really keen to be, be involved with that and hopefully help and develop this footy club and help put them on the right direction, that hopefully in, 3 to 5 years' time, we can look back on it and have a, really good, discussion around how it went and what worked and what didn't, and where this club is today. That was something that was really exciting for me. So it was the challenge of, putting myself out there in the comfort zone, and a job like that I'm in now was something that I was striving for as the midfield coach at the AFL level. So, it's not something that you take lightly, though. Obviously, I've got 3 kids, a wife, So, moving your family is something that's quite big. My kids are 11, 9 and 8 now. So, they're in primary school, but my oldest lad goes into high school next year. So a lot of these things come into consideration. All my family is obviously still back in South Australia. So you miss them. All our, really close friends are back there. So it isn't a decision you take lightly. So it's something we talked about for a couple of months, but in the end, we were really up for the challenge. So, and it's been really exciting, and we're really glad that we made the decision. And we're looking forward to a really bright future up here at the Gold Coast Suns.
Yeah, I think it's obviously, the sports industry is so small and obviously condensed. So, I said to I've thought into, in my head about, the possibility of moving interstate for opportunities. And I was meant to be moving internationally for opportunities, but that hasn't obviously worked out the way it's supposed to. But Tate, the next question I've got for you is, can you compare and contrast the Crows and the Suns? Obviously, Adelaide's a really big footy town, whereas, Queensland's quite, obviously, they're very heavily interested in rugby. So, and I suppose that sort of links into some of the challenges that the club faces as well.
Yeah, I think that was probably the biggest eye opener for me when I moved up here. As you mentioned, Adelaide's a 2-team town, and some people sort of ask me, "Oh, what's Adelaide?" I said, "Well, a lot of people, in general, either follow Adelaide or Port, and it's sort of like their second job. They go to work 9 till 5, and then their second job is which team do you support? And there's, obviously a massive rivalry there. And, as I said to someone, on the radio, you've got a morning show in Adelaide that talks about footy. You've got a couple in the afternoon every time you're driving home from work are talking about footy. So I think, the media and that, and the hype around footy in South Australia is massive. And that was the biggest thing. I think, in Adelaide, we'd do probably a radio interview or like this, a podcast, or, something to do with TV or something like that, once a week. Whereas up here in Gold Coast, I might have done maybe 2 or 3 things throughout the whole year. So there's not as big a, like you said, it's a massive rugby state. And, but the thing is that the Gold Coast Suns are doing really well up here, and I'll, put Brisbane in that category as we're trying to promote the game as much as we can in the community up here, to just keep, developing people's, understanding around football and what it does in the community. And we've got a really great program around the community and what we do. Each one of us coaches is aligned to 2 local football clubs, and we spend time out there at junior level. We spend time out there with their A-grade team. We mentor their coaches. We obviously do coaching clinics. So we do a lot in the community to try and, develop football as much as we can. So that's probably one of the big things. Obviously, the other one is Adelaide's a fairly strong and established football club, like you say, being in a 2-team town. So, as I said, when I come up here, they're on a real, change of scenery in terms of revamping of the list and the football department. So it's a young football club. We've got a really young list, but a really enthusiastic and encouraging list. You look at a couple of the draftees from this year, and there's 2 kids there at the start that are that self-motivated. They're determined. They want to be the best they can be, and it actually, as a coach, it's really encouraging and puts a smile on your face every time you walk into work, knowing that these guys want to be their best. And that's the thing that I love about this football industry, is that my job is to help allow these players to develop and achieve their goals. It's not about me and what I want to do. I'll get that along the way, but as I've always said, there's nothing better than watching a young player that you've had a little bit of influence in maybe make his AFL debut, and seeing his family being able to present him with the Guernsey. It's so, it just makes me really emotional that time when I see that sort of stuff. And that's what you're here to do as a coach. You're here to help these players achieve their goals and be the best person and football player they can be.
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely agree with that 100%. And I suppose it's really interesting to hear about, from yourself, getting firsthand experience up on the Gold Coast, having been in obviously both SA and Queensland, and it's obviously very different. I remember when I was involved with the South Australian Inclusive team, and we went up to the Gold Coast for the National Inclusion Carnival in 2017, and we had a bit of involvement with the Gold Coast Suns, which was really awesome. I remember we went to a school to do a clinic, and I simply just asked the kids. I think we had about 20 kids. I was just like, all right, kids, who's heard of AFL? And I reckon only 2 put their hands up. I couldn't believe it. Like, even with, like, you know, a team just 10 minutes up the road, basically, you know, it was quite hard to believe, and I just thought it was quite extraordinary. Tate, could you provide a bit more detail about your current role as the assistant midfield coach to Stuart Dew?
Yeah, sure. So as the midfield coach, I suppose my main responsibility is through pre-season, I was, had to implement the program for the midfield. So again, I work closely with Josh Franco, who's in charge of the stoppages and structure across the whole ground. So we work pretty closely with the midfield group, but the main responsibility for me is to make sure I'm implementing, the game plan around what obviously Dewey's, philosophy is, and then working with obviously the individuals around how they want to be developed, and creating a brand of football and a brand for our midfield group of what we want to stand for going forward. So that's the sort of pre-season. Game day, obviously in charge of the midfield, and my main role is to inside the stoppage. So it's, how we're structured up inside, our connection between our ruck and our midfield. And then on the back of that is the transition. So how we're spreading from, out of stoppage, whether it's offensively or defensively. So we've got about 20 guys in our midfield portfolio that we generally work with pretty closely. We've got Tim Clark, who's our midfield development coach as well. So he works with our NEFL team and assists me in terms of the development of all our players. So, yeah, so that's, the midfield role. Obviously, we've got our structure up here as senior coach. We've got a forward coach, a defensive coach. As I said, Josh does the stoppages and I look after the midfield. And then we've got 3 development coaches under that look after our NEFL team. So, we've got, and Andrew Swallow is part-time, who looks after all our tackling and some NEFL stuff as well. So, yeah, we've got a list of 9 there that do that. But, yeah, that's my role, obviously, and I get judged on how we perform as a midfield group each week, obviously by all the fans and supporters and the football clubs. So, look, I'm lucky enough to have this role for this year, and I'm contracted for next year. So hopefully that continues, and, looking to build on, a really solid foundation that was built last year with Josh, to be able to keep furthering developing that with the group this year and going forward.
Yeah, it sounds like an absolutely amazing opportunity. And I know on the Gold Coast, there's been some really good draft picks come through in the past couple of years. You talk about obviously Rowell and Anderson, who picks, 1 and 2, and helps at their best mates as well. And both obviously made their debut in round 1 against Port. And obviously the year before there was Rankin and Lukosius. We unfortunately haven't been able to see Rankin yet, but hopefully we'll see him sooner rather than later. And obviously Lukosius seems like a very, flexible type, can play at both ends of the ground and even push up onto a wing, which is obviously going to be really exciting for the club. Tate, is there a particular player, let's go one player from each of the Crows and the Suns, that really stands out to you in terms of, professionalism and, overall development?
Yeah, I suppose probably again, I don't like really individualising players because, as I said, I've, worked with a lot of the players that obviously come through Adelaide and obviously last year with the Suns. But, one guy that probably sticks in my mind a little bit is young Charlie Cameron. I was fortunate enough to be the forward development coach when he came into the industry, and he was a real quiet, shy young lad. And to see him today to develop into what he has achieved, and obviously All-Australian last year, he always had that potential, but it was, working out ways to get it out of him. And he's really cheeky, and which was what made it fun about working with those type of guys. So he's probably one that I'd say, and to this day, he was one of the first guys when I got stood down that sent me a text message to see how I was. So, it's sort of, those sort of relationships that you really value, going forward. And, as I said before, I was lucky enough to work with some really good, good guys in, Eddie and Tex and Lynchy and these guys, which are already superstars, obviously, before I come on board. But it was probably I think what I like most about these players is that they actually value you as a person as well, and they make you feel valuable. And that, that's something that really, I hold, in really high regard for those guys that I deal with. So, the likes of, Rory Laird was another one that texted me, to see how I was going. And these guys, you might not have had much impact on them, but it's the relationship that you built with them, I think, over time that was really good. So, so that was good. And if I look at the Suns, there's, again, it's only new to me in terms of only spent a bit of time with these guys. But when I look at professionalism and guys that try and get the most out of themselves, Toot Miller's one that, trains really hard, and he's an ultimate professional. He's a really good chef. He cooks, his cooking's unbelievable, but, he does everything he can to make sure that he is prepared, every week, understanding the way we're going to play, if he's going to have to look after a player, what he needs to do. So, that's really exciting. And obviously I've been, blessed this year to be lucky enough to work with Matthew Rowell and Noah Anderson, who are, they're, in day one, ultimate professionals. They know what they want. They're very self-driven. And it's I messaged Matthew Rowell the other day, and I was having a conversation with him on the phone. And while I was doing that, he was on his rebounder. That's, throwing balls back to him. So that's the type of kid he is. He's always got a footy in his hand. He always wants to be the best. So, that's, I think as a coach, sometimes we think, this is a really good job, but sometimes we're actually privileged to be in this position to be able to work with some of these people as well that want to be the best. So, I'm really fortunate that I've had to date, 12 years in the industry, met some amazing people, and I hope it lasts for another 12 years at least. But as we know, this industry can be pretty tough at times. So we'll wait and see. But, I've made some really good friends over time.
Yeah, it's obviously really cool to hear about what people are like, off the field. You see, Charlie Cameron, he seems sometimes a little bit arrogant on the field, but, I suppose it's nice to see that personal side to the players as well. And I've heard a lot of good things about Toot Miller. He seems like a really nice kid, and obviously seems like he's a very team orientated person, which is really good for the club. And hopefully, you mentioned those young guys as well. Hopefully they can stick around, because I think they're obviously going to be really important to the future of the Suns. Tate, where do you see the Gold Coast Suns at the moment? Obviously pre-COVID-19, there's been a few changes, obviously over the past couple of years. So where do you currently see the club at the moment?
Yeah, look, it's interesting. I mean, last year, obviously, we had a really good start to the year, but we obviously couldn't sustain that throughout the whole season. So that was probably something going into the pre-season that we were really focused on was, our starts are good, but how do we now maintain that throughout the year? And, we, did have a few injuries, but we're not making that as an excuse. We believe that we've got, a group there that we can continue to build, and we need to be in a position where we can make sure we're challenging every week on week, to become the best football club we can be. So obviously, as I said before, there's been a bit of a revamp from a, playing perspective. The most positive thing, though, is I think last year we had 24 players re-sign, for the football club for long term. So that's really exciting that the players are seeing, where we're trying to take the football club as a football department, and they can see the future and they can see the talent that's around there. Again, now it's just a matter of getting games into these players and gelling as a unit. Obviously, we brought in Hugh Greenwood and Brandon Ellis through the trade last trade, and that was really exciting for our club as well. Hugh, who I was lucky enough to work with at Adelaide and had a really strong relationship there. It was great for him to be able to come and sign with us and get on board. And obviously, Brandon's a two-time premiership player and brings a lot of experience, a lot of run on the outside. So we feel we've got a group that, obviously is young in age, but also young in games played. But again, the feeling in the group, they don't want to use that as an excuse. Every time we go out in the ground, we're there to compete. We're there to win. So we want to make sure that that mantra is something that we continue throughout. And yeah, there's going to be ups and downs, which is, like all football clubs, they go through times. And obviously we're in a really big down at the moment, and how we come out of this is going to be critical. So how the players, deal with this over this period of time, and the training they're doing and the relationships they're building, it's going to be really important for us going forward. So I think, we're still in a phase where we're, continually trying to develop our depth and get as many games into players, while always being competitive every time we step out onto the footy field.
I suppose I've got to throw you a little bit of a curveball here. Obviously, you mentioned when you were at the Crows, you did a little bit of recruiting under Matt Rendell. Do you have any, I suppose, input into the recruiting for the Suns? And is part of the strategy, I suppose, for the Suns when it comes to trading and trying to get in some senior players, trying to get Queenslanders who want to come home as well? Is, we see, people who are interstate, saying, I want to go back to Victoria, I want to go home, I want to come back to SA. Is Queensland, getting those players to come home as strong of a lure, would you say?
Yeah, look, we don't get too deep involved with the recruiting. Obviously, we've got, Craig Cameron, who's our list manager that handles all of that, and Cal Burns looks after our national recruiting team. So those guys are obviously employed to do that job. Look, occasionally, for example, if there's, a couple of midfielders coming through, they might ask for our opinion in terms of watch a bit of vision, see what you think. Obviously, if you've worked at a previous club and there's some players that they may be targeting, obviously you may come into a little bit more of a, conversation piece, when those sort of things are happening. But obviously there's a lot of rules and regulations around, approaching players from other teams and contracts and all that sort of stuff. So it's really important, obviously, we stay in those guidelines. But yeah, occasionally we are used in that phase to be able to help. Now, in terms of Queenslanders coming back, look, if there's players that want that opportunity to come back home and be with their family and play with the Suns, I'm sure the club would always, take that as a really high priority on what we look for. But all importantly, there's always a criteria around, what people fit your culture and what people fit your game style and the way that you're hopefully trending in the future. So, it's not as easy as just going, oh yeah, he's the best player, let's take him. Sometimes there's a lot more that goes into it to make sure, again, we've got the right character. And it's no different to when they're recruiting myself as a coach or any other staff. They want to make sure that we're the right person and the right fit that fits their culture and what they're all about. And, obviously what my philosophies are compared to what the clubs are. Sometimes they'll align, sometimes there'll be some challenges, and that's some really good discussion points that, you can either work out or it's not going to work. So, I think, again, generally, if there's something that you may be able to help with from a recruiting or, trade perspective, the club is generally more than happy to get you involved.
Yeah, obviously, we saw a couple of years ago when Stuart Dew, first signed on as coach, Lockie Weller decided he wanted to come home after being at Freo for a couple of years, and the club was obviously able to facilitate that deal to, I suppose, and that's a really good sign for, players who want to go to the Gold Coast Suns and obviously return home, which is really good. Tate, what are the plans for yourself in the future in a post-COVID-19 world, and obviously the Suns as well?
Yeah, look, it's really interesting, and how long it's going to be, we're not sure. But I suppose from my perspective at this point in time, it's making as much contact without, overdoing it with the players and obviously the midfield group to keep checking in to make sure they're okay. A bit of my stuff is reflecting on the pre-season and how it worked and maybe what I could put in place or what we could put in place as a football club next year. We have a lot of chats as a coaching group on reviewing that, and we get people externally that will come into these chats and throw up different scenarios for us and challenge our thinking and how, you know, we may be able to keep developing. And then I suppose the next phase is once we've got a bit of a date around when we may be returning, it's then making sure that from a mids perspective, you know, players are starting to train around, you know, because it may only be 2 or 3 weeks before we start playing games. So there's not a lot of time to, you know, make sure they're back in the frame, you know, in their mental framework to make sure they're prepared and ready to play, ready for round 2. So a lot of my work at this point in time is, you know, going over structures and making sure my players are all understanding of the way we want to play and how we want to play, and you know, just keep building those relationships and checking in on players. And then obviously, as I said, once we've got a date, Stewie will give us a lot more information onto how it looks and where we may be heading, or, you know, if like we're lucky enough to stay up here, that'd be great. And yeah, then it's all go and focus in on round 2 and who our opponent is and what they may throw at us to make sure our players are best prepared to be ready for that game.
Yeah, it'll be obviously really interesting to see how it all plays out and whether the AFL obviously decides to go with the hub system. And, you know, I think everyone's just keen to watch some sport on TV, but obviously we want to make sure everyone's safe before we do that. Tate, thank you so much for joining us on Sports Isolated. It's been a real privilege getting to meet you and getting to chat with you. And I think I've taken a lot out of our chat today, and I really appreciate your time.
No, pleasure, Callum. Thanks for inviting me. It's been great. Cheers.
Yeah, obviously thanks to our mutual friend Ben Lucas for helping to arrange this. Shout out to Benny from Softball SA and obviously the South Adelaide Footy Club. For those of you who are watching at home, thank you so much for tuning in to Sports Isolated. We really appreciate your support on the channel. To show your support, please like, comment and subscribe, and we'll see you in the next video. Cheers.